So, of course, Socrates, in defining the philosopher as the one who loves the truth, or loves the sight of truth, has to sort of come up with the goods here and say what truth is. Now, let's follow pretty closely the argument on page 169. That starts just above margin number 476A. Socrates says that since beautiful is the opposite of ugly, they are two things. So you have one thing, the beautiful. You have another thing, the ugly. And since they are two things, each of them is also one. Okay. And the same argument applies then to just and unjust, good and bad, and all the forms. Each of them is itself one thing, but because they appear all over the place, in partnership with actions and bodies and with one another, each of them appears to be many things. And that's a very important passage. Let's go to a museum, and let's look at all the beautiful things in the museum. Let's look at sculptures and paintings and tapestries, and kinds of weird modern forms of art, maybe the video installation, a bit of architecture from an old building, and let's look at all those individual things. Individual painting by Picasso, individual sculpture by Michelangelo. And one may say, that picture a painting by Picasso is beautiful. And one may also say that sculpture by Michelangelo is beautiful. We have two individual things, very different from each other. We apply the same concept, beauty, to them. General idea of Socrates' theory of the forms, as I take it, is that each of them is beautiful in some way, in a partial way, and they're only beautiful because they participate in what, in translation, we call the form of beauty. The Greek is eidos, which doesn't really help very much, but the idea is that there is an idea or a form or a concept which is beauty in itself, and that's a general, abstract, thinkable, intellectual thing, and that if anything is beautiful, if any particular thing is beautiful, it's beautiful because it participates in that general form. So when he says each of them is itself one thing, beauty, the just, the good, but because they appear all over the place in partnership with actions and bodies and with one another, each of them appears to be many things. That is, we might have two just people, two people who can be called just people. They're very different from each other. Their actions are very different from each other. But they're both just because in some way or another those actions participate in the same thing, the same form. Well, what is the philosopher interested in then? The philosopher is not interested in the individual. The philosopher is interested in the form, in the conceptual, the one. And Socrates makes certain claims for the philosopher then, who is interested in the one, the form, as opposed to the many, the individual things. He says at the bottom of page 169, what about someone who believes in beautiful things, but does not believe in the beautiful itself, and would not be able to follow anyone who tried to lead him to the knowledge of it? Do you think he is living in a dream, or is he awake? Just consider, isn't it dreaming to think, whether asleep or awake, that a likeness is not a likeness, but rather the thing itself, that it is like? Glaucon, I certainly think that someone who does that is dreaming. The idea being that the individual things that we see in the world, the particulars, objects, people, events, are all partial representations or partial manifestations, I should say, partial manifestations in many ways of these singular forms, these one things, that a just man can never be completely just. Just as a beautiful painting can never be completely beautiful. In one way or another, they manifest in a partial way justice in itself or beauty in itself. And what Socrates is saying there at the bottom of 169, top of 170, is that to fail to see the form, or to realize that the form is the the perfect example of something, not even example, the perfect form of something, and that the individual things are partial, imperfect representations. If you fail to see that, it's like living in a dream. Now there, we can certainly see some justification for the philosopher ruling over the rest of the city, as Socrates claims. The guardians are philosophers, and right there you see a partial justification of their rule. Well, they see, because of their education, because of their insight, because of their training, they see the one, let's say, the form of justice. Non-philosophers are not interested in that. They don't see the perfect form of justice. They haven't investigated it. So it would stand to reason on some level that the person who knew justice in its perfect form would be the one who could make the city most just, if that actually makes sense. So it's these forms, or these ideas or general concepts, the eidos, that turns out to be what the philosopher is interested in. Now, for the rest of Book 5, after we're introduced to that, we get a characterization of the form as opposed to the individual thing, and the really important distinction that we'll see is the distinction between that which is being, and that which both is and is not, which is becoming. Now, this is a very abstract, metaphysical framework that he's setting up, but it's quite important to see how it fits into the finale of this argument in favor of the just life. So let's pause again and take a look at the rest of Book 5.